Yo, we're back. It's another edition of the Orange Bloods YouTube channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined by Anwar Richardson. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. If you want to, unfollow us and follow us again just to make sure that you're subscribed. Definitely hit the like button. But Anwar, you and I are here to tackle, I think, one of the best or biggest topics we could possibly have on the channel. Is ready to dethrone OU. Simple as that. Both programs are coming out of the spring. They each have their own issues that they're working on. And, it's spring football, but on some level, this is a conversation that gets answered in 4 or 5 months. So it can't be too early to already talk about this. Whatever's going to happen in October with this game, we always use the baked reference, right? Charlie's cake in the oven.
Mm-hmm.
But this game is in the oven and it's cooking right now. And whatever transpires in October in Dallas, or quite frankly, if these two teams were to meet again in December in Dallas, a lot of it will be centered around things we're talking about today.
Yeah, because really what it starts to boil down to is a Sarkeesian versus Lincoln Riley kind of conversation. And one person who, we consider and Lincoln Riley to be a really good offensive genius, very good coach. You and I, despite what people on the OU side sometimes like to say, we speak very highly of Lincoln Riley, and probably to the chagrin of Texas fans who are so damn tired of us pumping him up. But then you also have a guy named Steve Sarkisian, who also is an offensive mind, who did some very good things throughout his career, and obviously most notably what he did in Alabama. So now it really becomes like, okay, this battle between the both of them, what does that look like in this chess game? There was a chess game last year, right, Ketch, when Texas kind of got ahead and Oklahoma was forced to bench their starting quarterback because it was like, man, it was almost like we're waving a white flag. We got to do something different. And then all of a sudden OU comes back, does what OU does, forces OT, and then they win it from there. So the question really becomes now, you can start from an elementary level. Is the starting quarterback at Texas ready to go ahead and go against a Spencer Rattler? And of course, is obviously, I don't have to edit this portion now, but, the coaching battle, what does that look like?
I think you somewhat touched on where my head was at when you brought up Spencer Rattler. There is a part of me that wonders if Texas missed their chance with Spencer Rattler as the Oklahoma quarterback. That on paper, a year ago, Texas had a massive advantage. And you know what? Go in that game, no matter how you want to look at it, Texas was in that game with a 6th-round senior quarterback. And Oklahoma was in that game with a redshirt freshman that would actually get benched in that game. Sam could be better, right? Sam could have been a 4th-round pick or a 3rd-round pick or a 1st-round pick. But on paper, that's a massive advantage. You had an NFL quarterback. Other guy was only good enough to get benched the time that you played him, only to come back into the game later on. If I told you that a year ago at this time, that look, when these two teams play in October, Rattler gets benched during the game, you're like, okay, Texas won that one. Well, they didn't. And by the end of the year, he was no longer a guy getting benched. He was a guy that people were talking about as the Big 12's player of the year and the highest rated quarterback in the conference. And he will go into this year as an NFL draft prospect. He's draft eligible after this year. This will be his 3rd year. So if he blows up and has a big year, that will be part of the conversation. Whereas Texas is now where Oklahoma was kind of a year ago. They've got great offensive coaching, just like Rattler had a year ago. There's something about having to do everything for the first time that very organically is genuine and takes time to go through. A guy has to make his first start, and he's got to play a team first for the first time, and he's got to go through adversity. And like Rattler did all that stuff last. And there were after the month of September, it did not look like Oklahoma was going to win the Big 12. Or they looked wobbly at the very least. If you were Anwar, if you wanted to sit there and tell me, well, I know they've lost a couple of games, but talk to me in December. They always find a way. I probably would have said the same thing, but they were wobbly entering the Texas game. Oklahoma better position this year to go into this season hoping to make the playoffs and hoping to have a team that can compete with the likes of Ohio State and Alabama than it was a year ago. Now, whether or not they're really closer from 30,000 feet up remains to be seen. But this is an Oklahoma team that going into this season will have answers to the questions that they didn't have answers to going into this game a year ago. And I'm not convinced that Texas on paper as a team yet. We've had this conversation before. The replacing quarterback, left tackle, and their top pass rusher. None of those positions, which all really matter, have definitive answers yet. So it's hard for me to talk about Texas realistically being a challenger to Oklahoma right now when the ABCs of this team all the way to Z aren't positioned yet in a way where I feel like Texas has earned the right to have that conversation. It's like, is this the year they dethrone Oklahoma? Okay, well, maybe after we find out if they actually have the kind of answers, key spots on the field that are going to allow it to be that kind of a team. Because I think you and I right now look at this and say, I think Vegas has the over and under win total for Texas at 8.5 right now. And I think that actually is perfect.
It is.
And I'm at 8, and I'm wondering whether or not I should be at 9. And it has nothing to do with Steve Sarkisian. Like, I totally respect what I think this staff is better. I think this staff beats Oklahoma in October last year with the advantage on paper that it had in some key talent personnel places. Those are gone now. And it feels unfair to be like, hey, Sark, I know you don't have these things, and you and Anwar and I can't name a bunch of NFL players in next year's draft that will be eligible to go do this with, but go be a top 4, top 5 team in the country without the hardware to get there like it is. I don't know that Nick Saban does that, and he's the GOAT. Like, Nick Saban has built this thing so that he doesn't have to Belichick his way. You know, you never watch a season and go, boy, Saban and that staff really worked hard this year. Man, they did something nobody else could do. That's not what college football is mainly about. It's about having talent advantages. And then in the very slimmest margins, when the best of the best play each other in a play, then I think coaching and advantages that you can have there really matter. I think Texas will have talent advantages or talent, washes with most of the teams they play this year, which will allow coaching to be a big part of this season. Don't know, though, in a direct comparison to Oklahoma, whether that's fair to ask.
I mean, because here's the challenge going into the season, Catch, is that when we look at it, more than likely, we say Oklahoma's number 1, Iowa State's number 2, and Texas is at number 3. Like that, That's where we're at right now. And so we're almost, it's, in some ways, we're putting the cart before the horse, because in some ways, can you get past Iowa State? I mean, that in itself, when you got a team that's returning all your key players from your tight end to your quarterback to your defensive players, and Matt Campbell's a hard out there. So is this game at Iowa State?
Ames.
It's in Ames this year, right? Yeah. And so now you have to travel on the road. Yeah, I mean, that's challenging. It's interesting because you hear Steve Sarkisian talking. He comes out of the spring, Catch. He seemed to be really excited about this team. I mean, he wasn't poo-pooing anything. He wasn't trying to talk down about it. He basically said, like, hey, we can continue developing. I mean, he felt like this is a team that could compete for a championship. You don't always hear that, Catch, from first-year coaches. Like, the one thing first-year coaches don't want is expectations. Right. That's the one thing they don't want to place don't place any expectations on me. I don't know what I've inherited. We're trying to work through things, trying to get guys on the same page. So don't put that on me, Ricky Bobby. And he's been a person that said, I'll take that. I'll take these expectations. But it's easy to say it when you're outside of it. Once you get into it, it's a totally different thing. It's a totally different beast. And we know, OU from the transfers that they've brought in to the receivers that they've had coming back to the running backs. Like we know overall they're stacked. And we also understand that this is a team that once again learning a new offense, once again learning a new defense, having to put all these things together. It opens the season against a really tough opponent. I mean, they have a tough out in week one. To your point, Ketch, you've talked about Arkansas. I've kind of come around to you. Still going on the road versus Arkansas could be a challenge. So, but before you even get to OU, what does it even look like from a team standpoint, like a team component? So 6 straight, you can't ignore 6 straight. I know Texas fans want to, but you can't ignore 6 straight.
I have so many thoughts, and I hope I don't lose them all. Real quick, I will say this. I think the thing, if I would tell Texas fans to feel good, the thing that it has going for it that Oklahoma had a year ago was that these two teams don't have to play each other for a month. And I think there's a vast amount of growth that this team can make in the month of September, even if they were to go 2-2. I mean, they could be this year's Oklahoma team, come out of the gates, lose a couple of games. Everybody's kind of laughing at I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm saying that I'm using this as an example, though, to point out that I think that this is a Texas team that will be at one level of growth in its first game. And by the time it plays in October against Oklahoma, it will just be a different team. But it's very difficult for us in May to talk about the team in October and all of that growth when there's so many question marks that are unanswered about what kind of growth exists in May leading us to August. And I mean, even now there's tons of projection, and Texas doesn't officially have a starting quarterback, but you and I will talk about the Oklahoma game because we will do our best to put our best foot forward and to mentally, what's that team look like in our minds with an updated depth chart. So it's a tricky conversation to have. I had an NFL guy. This is one of the things I wanted to say. I'm just going to kind of scatter shoot over as a response to some of the things you said. Iowa State may lead college football in players drafted next year. I had a guy in the NFL draft industry last year tell me they've got double-digit Iowa State players with draftable grades entering this next season. That doesn't mean they're going to have. That doesn't mean they'll have even 2 first. That doesn't mean any of that. But it means, Texas just lost 5 guys, right? And that was tied with Oklahoma for the most in the Big 12. I think you and I have had a hard time coming up with 5 guys that we think will absolutely get drafted next year. I think we're right on about 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Iowa State comes into this season with 21 or 22 returning starters, and at least 10 to a dozen of those guys are viewed as NFL guys on some level. It'll be the most mature team potentially in the history of the Big 12. And so I, as someone who's covered Big 12 football since its creation, I've never seen a team return that many seniors, let alone a team that was pretty good last year.
Yeah.
It's weird because we never watched Iowa State and thought they were great. They're pretty good, right? But we've also never, and so I think the same thing this year. But man, there's got to be something said for being that old and that much experience, and we'll find out what it's worth.
It's the BYU of Iowa, essentially.
It'll be a lot of men, right?
Yeah,
and when Texas fans how many true freshmen do I think will come in and make immediate impacts? When we talk about the Troy O'Mearas of the world and how far they have to, you know what I mean? When we start talking about these puzzle pieces this year for the Longhorns, Iowa State they know exactly who their team is. That's a program that came out of the spring with 0 real question marks, other than can their very good players, maybe the 7th round players, right? Like guys, when I say the NFL, they're NFL draftable guys, their last couple of rounds, they have 6 or 7 guys drafted in the 6th and 7th round. Can those guys make themselves into 4th rounders? And if they have a handful of guys do that on top of some of the top of the end class players they already have, that's how Iowa State potentially wins a Big 12 championship in a rare anomaly of a year where I don't even know how you just get everybody to not think about. They had guys that could have gone in the NFL draft this year, and everybody just caught this momentum of, no, we're going to stay. Numbers are kind of crazy. I think that I go back to the Sark thing. I don't put this on the coaching staff to some degree, because it is impossible for me to look at the Texas roster right now, of which Sarkeesian has had very little input in building. And it's hard for me I just don't know what's fair to expect. And I don't give Sark I give Sark credit for having high expectations, right? Like not running from them.
Sure.
But how would it sound if this team that finished 19th in the country last year with one of its best seasons, a disappointing season, but still one of the best seasons that this school has seen in a decade in terms of winning percentage? I think it's the second highest since 2009. You can't do total wins because it was a shortened season, but they won their bowl game in convincing fashion. He's not taking over what Charlie, I mean, he's kind of taken over what Charlie took over, which was this team was pretty good last year. They weren't very good, but they were pretty good. Herman comes in and took over a ragtag outfit that literally got their coach fired with poor play, as opposed to the perceived mediocre play. And even Herman came in with hyperbole, saying the offensive line was as good as the Ohio State offensive line. Remember that? Like that was a real thing.
Yeah, that happened.
That happened. And so I don't know. All I can think of is no matter how confident this coaching staff is, they haven't got punched in the mouth yet. And they will be punched in the mouth this season at some point, maybe a couple of times. And how this staff responds and how they can get this team to respond will define how this season goes. And we can point back to the job that Lincoln Riley did a year ago. He's never coached a season that hasn't ended in a Big 12 championship. It's an amazing data point. All he's ever known as a head coach is winning the conference title. But a year ago, his team was wobbly. They had quarterback questions. The roster didn't look stout. They didn't just have a bunch of NFL dudes drafted. And then after losing a couple of games, they got it back together again. They put Humpty Dumpty together on the fly with incredible crisis management at the top. And I think that if Sarkeesian and company are able to do the same thing, then Texas A has a really elite coaching staff, and B, this season's got a chance to be all kinds of things. But I can't just be like, they're definitely going to do that. And it's an unfair expectation. I mean, that's more than he's ever done. This isn't his first year as a head coach. He's never won a conference title. I don't know that he's ever had a season ranked higher than the one that Herman just had. And to be like, you've got to come in year one with a little bit of a lesser roster, and you definitely have to finish top 15. I mean, I get it. I know why people would say that. It just feels a little icky for me to say that. But knowing that, I feel some real hesitation about how fair that is. It's the job, but I think part of Tom Herman's job last year, Anwar, was unfair. And this ain't a business where fairness has anything to do with anything.
So let me say my last statement on this would be, Ketch, I think that the key, if you're a Texas fan, has to be Sarkeesian when it comes to X's and O's. Because no matter what, when it's all said and done, Texas was close in all of Tom Herman's games. Every single one of them was a close game. You go back to USC from the inception and from year one. They beat them the following year. You go to the Oklahoma games, were pretty close, except for maybe the Big 12 championship game. There were no blowouts, though. There weren't blowouts. And so what it really meant is it came down to the little things. It came down to the little things, whether it's the rotation, and we can complain about the rotation or the binder, and going for it in certain situations, not kicking the field goal versus Iowa State, which ended up coming back to haunt them in the end, right? Maybe letting the foot off the gas when they got the lead against Oklahoma, and you weren't seeing what they were doing before that was working. So maybe those little things are the ones that you say, okay, if Sarkeesian does the little things, maybe that wasn't done previously, and keeps it going, keeps the rotation there, takes the points when he needs to, make sure he's had the best players on the field at all times. Maybe if those little things make a difference, maybe then all of a sudden you could say, hey, all things were equal, but we hired this guy just to be the little difference maker. You didn't hire him to build a house, right? You didn't hire him to put up the drywall or anything like that. Well, you just hired him to do the interior stuff. Just do the little things to make it into a home, make it into a winning home. And maybe that's really what the Sarkeesian mantra, or it's going to be the thing that he has to do this year. Just do the little things. If you do the little things, run Bijan 25 times a game and just see if people can stop him. Just little things like that. I maybe give Texas fans hope that, hey, if there is a chance to dethrone Oklahoma, it's just because they're going to have a coach that does all the little things that it takes, because you and I both know it takes all the little things to beat Lincoln Riley. He's a hell of a coach. And I know people think, Ketch, that you and I, when we say things about Lincoln Riley potentially being an NFL coach, and we said it like a few years ago, and people kind of say, oh, you guys just want him to be gone so Texas can get an upper hand. Look, if Matt Rule can coach in the NFL, damn it, man, Lincoln Riley can. And I'm just saying, damn it, man, you can't tell me Lincoln Riley.
Kingsbury.
If Kingsbury can go in and do a good job, you can't tell me that this guy couldn't come in and do the damn thing. So when we say it's of high praise that says this guy is effing good, and to beat this guy, you better come strong.
Lincoln Riley would have had the Cardinals in the playoffs last year, because Kingsbury almost had them in the playoffs, and yes. Cliff Kingsbury is not Lincoln Riley. I love that Lincoln Riley's in the Big 12, because when and if Texas can climb that mountain, it'll mean a lot. It'll mean something was accomplished, that they weren't handouts at the conference championship store, right? And it will mean that they had, but I think that's the challenge. And look, it was the challenge that Mac Brown eventually had to master when he was going up against Bob Stoops.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
You had to beat a Hall of Famer to get there. It matters. And it's interesting, Anwar, about this conversation. And I'm curious about your reaction to this. And then we can move on and close up shop on this particular video and discussion and leave the rest of it for another day. But I have never covered a Texas football team that has the kind of coaching staff that maybe Texas has, or at least Texas likes to think that they have. And here's what I mean. When Mac Brown was in his heyday, they just overwhelmed people with talent. In the greatest era of Texas football that anyone has ever seen, really, from 2000 to 2009, Texas did it like Alabama does it. When the NFL draft rolled around, multiple first-round draft picks almost every year, lots of top 5 picks. Over the span of a decade, Texas had 7 top 5 picks. I mean, Texas hasn't had a first-round pick going on 8 years next year. And in its heyday, they weren't just cranking out draft picks. They were cranking out top of the food chain.
And multiple, by the way.
Yes.
And multiple.
Yes. And that's not even including a guy like Earl Thomas, who was a safety and goes 14. You know what I mean? Like, I'm literally just counting top 7 guys drafted in the top 7 in a 9-year window is out of this world good. So when Texas had its success, that's what I saw. I saw Vince Young. I saw Cedric Benson and Roy Williams and Leonard Davis and, these just behemoth players and NFL prospects. That's how Texas beat the Iowa States. And they didn't play TCU at the time, but the Baylors. And that's how they beat them, like, for 14 years running. When it all flipped in 2010, suddenly coaching staffs mattered again, and Mac had to hire a new staff. And I've now seen, I've lost, I don't even know how many coordinators it is now. I don't. I'm almost scared to ask in the last 10 years how many coordinators on both sides. I'm scared to look it up.
If I put the number at 16, no,
combined?
60 combined.
Maybe 2 less. Maybe it feels, but if you said 8 and 8 for each, I mean, I feel like there was a year where they had 4 in 1 year, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we think about offensive coordinators, you go Brian Harsin, Major Applewhite, and then there was, do we count co-coordinators? Do they get to count, or are we just talking top of the food chain coordinators?
Top of the food chain. Because Herb Hand's technically a coordinator, but I mean, we didn't.
Well, how many did how many did Charlie have? Because
I don't know.
Because he had at least 3, right? Because he
started with Sean Watson.
Right. But then he fired him in midseason and hired
he went with Norvell, Jay Norvell.
I totally had forgotten Jay Norvell's name.
Yeah, Jay Norvell. Is he still at New Mexico? I think he's still coaching there. It's actually pretty decent. And then
he is a
went with then went with Sterling Gilbert.
God, it feels like
that was 3. That was 3 there.
Right. There's 3.
So then if you go Tim Beck, Tom Herman, and then who was the last guy?
I mean, that's 5, but that's not in.
No, don't forget the last guy, number 6. Number 6 too. No, that'd be 6.
Yurcich is
6. That's 6.
And then Major and Harsin. So that's 8 since 2011. 9 if you wanted to go back and count Greg Davis in 2010. That's on offense.
Yeah.
And on defense, Manny Diaz and then Greg Robinson when Manny Diaz had to get fired in the middle of the year. And Jerry was hired and then never coached. He left after 3 weeks. And, that's just Mac. That's not Bedford. And then Charlie and then Orlando. And now I guess you have to include the bowl game, right? Just like we included.
Yeah. So Nivar,
wide receivers. So you
Craig
have Nivar.
Then you had the guy last year from Rutgers. I forget his name already. Chris Ash. Yes.
8 right there, and that doesn't include switching. So we're up to 9 on. So that's more than 16.
Damn.
It's so. To finish that thought up, I've seen all these staffs come and go, and at no point in the last real 25 years have I ever gone into a season covering Texas football where it's like the coaching staff's going to be the difference. I've lived in the talent thing. And that's where I think you and I sometimes have a disconnect, because since you've showed up, you keep hearing me talk about the good old days. And you're like, well, we ain't even close to that. Right? You need to quit talking about the good old days, because Texas is light years from that type of, or at least 3 or 4 years away from having that type of talent in the program where you look at the roster and go, oh yeah, there's multiple first-round draft picks in every classification. But when I hear you talk about, well, this coaching thing is really going to matter, I've never seen that with my own eyeballs in a program that I've covered. I've never gone through a season where it's like Texas had the best coaches of anybody in the Big 12. They got to where they got to because of their coaching. It's never happened. Charlie was seen as a buffoon. Vance was a buffoon. And I don't even think those 2 things are fair, but that's how they were seen. Herman was seen as a buffoon. Mac was seen as a buffoon, kind of like. By the end, it was like old man grandpa. I've never seen, other than Will Muschamp and Greg Robinson, I've never really seen Texas fans happy with their defensive coordinators. I've never seen them happy. In 20 plus years, I've never, not one time, seen Texas fans happy with an offensive coordinator, where they're like Oklahoma fans are with Lincoln Riley. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, it don't matter that he's got to play with all walk-ons this year. He's Lincoln. Problem solved. All he does is win. I've never experienced that. So when I hear you and other people say, this is an 8-win team, but this coaching staff on paper is supposed to be better than the last one. So I think better coaching lifts this team up to 10 wins, 9 wins, whatever, right? It sounds like someone's talking about Santa Claus.
Here's the thing, though, Ketch. Here's the thing you got to remember now. Sarkeesian is the offensive coordinator. So if Sarkeesian's fired, he can't fire himself. So for the next however many years he's here, you could say at least 3 straight years, 4 straight years, whatever assuming that it's unsuccessful, right? If it's successful, then it's longer. Yeah. But if no matter what, he's the OC. So we don't have to worry about any revolving door at OC going forward. Like in the previous coaches, and that's what Lincoln Riley does, to his credit. For the most part, that's my offense, right? I mean, maybe there's someone in title, but if we understand that's his offense. If we understand that this is Sarkeesian's offense. So really the only changes that could really occur would be on the defensive side. And now if he's changing defensive coordinators every year or 2 years or something like that, then it's a huge problem. And this thing is going nowhere fast. But that stability of saying you're the OC, this is my playbook, this is what we're doing. So from the time you come from a freshman to a senior, this is what we're doing. Maybe there'll be some new installs, some new wrinkles here and there. This is that. That should be different than here's this new guy with his offense. Here's this new guy with his offense. This guy wants to run this. This guy wants to run that. Norvell was trying to survive because he was mid-season. Here comes Sterling Gilbert. Now he's there. Here comes Tom Herman and his staff, and then he's trying to work with his OC, Tim Beck, and then it's like, well, Tim Beck isn't working, so let me fire him in the Maryland game, and now I'm going to do it. Let me do this for a couple of years. I don't want to do this anymore. Let me go ahead and bring in Sterling Gilbert. He can do it. I don't want to just be a head coach, and now it's like, oh, let's bring in a new. It's at least the revolving door at one position, and maybe that makes a difference.
It's a great point. Kudos. I'm just saying, I'm 44. I turned 45 this month. I've been in this business professionally, working in this market since I was 18. I have never experienced a season where at the end of the year, anyone thought Texas had anywhere near the best coaching of like any team they played. That since they've been in the Big 12, now you can go back to the Big 12 championship game and they beat Nebraska in year 1 and say that John Makovic in that game out-coached Nebraska. But Texas lost 5 games that year. Mm-hmm. I've never experienced a season where at the end of the year, anyone thinks that Texas has the best coaching staff, let's just say in the Big 12. I've no idea what that looks like. Very few of those 25 seasons, I feel like people thought Texas had truly a top 2 or 3 staff. That at the end of the year, when you start talking about coach of the year and stuff like that, that's always somebody else's program to cover. That's always somebody else. When Texas has been good, they've just had elite talent. So I feel like a hopeless romantic that has never known love. I believe in it. I believe that it can exist. And man, how great would it be at the end of this year to be able to say Steve Sarkisian and his staff did the best job of anybody in the Big 12. Because if you can say that, forget about anything else. It makes the season feel possible in every way. But I've never seen that. And it's because I'm now 44 and I feel like every year and when a new staff comes in, this gets talked about. I just am now in a point where it's like, I'm a hopeless romantic that wants to believe in love, but I might not fully acknowledge it until I'm in it. And I certainly can't do it. Like I've just been the subject of too many bad rom-coms at this point to like, because you and I believe that Sark is better than Tom Herman. Like, his resume at this point most recently reads better than Herman's does. He helped a ton of players, but I just don't know what it means in Austin. I don't know. It's all Texas has never hired. Well, I can't say that. Of those 16 or 17 guys, almost all of them are buzz. And this place sucks the buzz out of coaching, because I've just never seen anyone in this town happy with its freaking coaching staff. So when all of the hopes are pinned on the coaching staff being the difference, I'm like looking around. Am I in the Matrix? Is this a simulation? I feel like I'm turned on and everyone else isn't. And it's a weird feeling, because I'm sheepish. I don't want to talk about it too much and be like, God, you are the real love of the party there, Ketch. Way to bring me down. It's just a huge dose of reality that exists that I can't look away from.
Fair enough. I'll let you close it with that one.
Hey, thanks for staying in. Texas fans, all your hopes and dreams are on Sark. It's not a bad place to be. One of these days, Texas has to have a great coaching staff, right? One of these days. And if you believe that, if you believe in that dream, if you think this Texas coaching staff can be great and special and better than Lincoln Riley and the best in the Big 12, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. You'll hear tons of conversation on this channel about that very thing as it happens, when it happens. I can promise you that. We'll talk to you later in the week. Peace.